let's get this show on the road. So, I hope everybody is here for Banned Books and Ousted Authors, which we had originally titled, Should Your Children Read About Lesbian Vampires? But we changed our minds at the last moment. I'm just going to let the panel introduce themselves and just say a few words about your interest in this topic. I know all of us are bookworms, so we could just go for this. My name is Becky Roop. I'm a writer. I'm on the library board here at the Swanton Library, and I will defend this library and its right to have books to my death. Okay, Abby.
All right, I am Abby Gaudette. I am the director of this here library. I am also a mom, and so I think those two things right there are my main interests in banned book topic.
My name is Caitlin Klass, and I'm the librarian at Albert D. Lawton Intermediate School in Essex Junction. I have grades 6 through 8, about 350 kids. I've been on the Vermont School Library Association's board for a long time, and Beth and I are the intellectual freedom representatives for the state school libraries.
And my name is Susie Snow. I am an elementary school librarian at Hiawatha Elementary School in Essex Junction. I am the current president of the Vermont School Library Association. Work closely with both of these lovely women, and I'm very happy to be here.
My name is Beth Shelley. I'm the librarian at Westford School. I have about 180 pre-K through 8th grade students, and I'm so delighted to be with my colleagues and friends.
I'm Bill Schubart. I live in Heinsberg. Grew up in Morrisville, Vermont. I'm an author of 9 books. I was formerly on the ACLU board, which of course was a lightning rod for book bans. And I'm very happy to be here today. I feel quite strongly about the issue and look forward to just an open discussion with everybody.
This should be fun. Well, I started out doing some research on this and found out that according to PEN America's Index of School Book Bans, in the last 6 months, they've recorded about 4,500 banned books across 23 different states. So this last few years has just seen a surge in banned books. So I know that Bill has an intro, so...
Well, I'll just say a few things. I wrote a 72-minute speech, but I'll try and keep it to like three minutes. And this is for me how complicated this is. I don't believe that freedom is an absolute. I'm not one of the many today challenging our vital freedoms, but history's taught us that we need commonly agreed upon limits to freedom imposed both by democratically elected governments and by ourselves expressed in an ethos which may be personal, spiritual, or based on a specific religion. The limitations, though, will vary somewhat from government to government, religion to religion, and individual to individual. But whether external or internal, we do need some limits to freedom or we experience chaos and anarchy. So the degree to which our freedoms are limited will always be a subject for debate, and hopefully will be informed by groups like this, librarians, people in our communities, and a free and open press. And together, we should be able to find consensus on the guardrails that protect our artistic and intellectual communities. The most banned book is Orwell's 1984. His Animal Farm has also been banned, Salinger's Catcher in the Rye, Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, and Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita. More recent titles include Toni Morrison's Beloved and The Color Purple. The first 5 titles were required reading when I went to high school. James Joyce's Ulysses didn't need to be banned because no one could finish it, including me. When I first read Lolita, I myself wondered if it shouldn't be banned. It is so explicit, about the sexual obsession, this older man's sexual obsession with a 12-year-old girl. According to PEN America, as Becky said, some 4,300 books have been banned across 23 states and 52 public school districts. Most of these titles openly discuss racial diversity, racism, inclusion, LGBTQ gender identity, or sex and sex education. Texas leads the pack, followed by Florida, Missouri, Utah, and South Carolina for the most book bans. Vermont has not yet banned any books, although I know, and we'll talk about it today, that our librarians do get requests to remove books from their shelves. And finally, I do think it's important to acknowledge that many books are age appropriate. I believe that it should be the purview of a community librarian to determine for their collection, with input from parents, what books should or should not be available to various age groups. Parents should exercise their own choice as to what books their children borrow, as they know best the capacity of their own child to absorb and contextualize a title, but they should not control what books are available to others. The efforts by some citizens to attack or erode our freedoms troubles me deeply. As an author with 9 books in the marketplace, efforts to ban books hits me personally. What are we becoming and why? Has this culture of censorship and mind control always existed to some degree in our country? What's the fear that drives these efforts to ban ideas and experiences expressed in prose, fiction, and poetry, or in art in general? And I'll leave it there.
Well, our first question is, are there some books that should be banned? And while I was researching this, I read about the Turner Diaries. I had not heard of a book called The Turner Diaries. It's by a guy named William Luther Pierce, who apparently was a racist, neo-Nazi, a fomenter of hate groups. And this book apparently it's all about a violent terrorist coup against the United States. It ends with the takeover of the government. And it's been touted as sort of a training manual for modern white supremacist groups. And right after the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol, Amazon, which has never done this before, pulled this book, such it was no longer sold on Amazon. And I thought, oh, that sounds like something that maybe we don't want to be waving in front of the general public. So, yeah, are there some books that should be banned? Go, guys. And what's your experience with this? Have you had a lot of parent protests about specific books?
I'll take it.
Go for it.
No, I don't think that there are books that should be banned. I think people have the right to choose what they would like to read, including students. And I think it's a really, really thin line between this book should be banned and what other books should be banned. In our district, there is also a difference, just so everyone's on the same page, there's a difference between a book being banned and a book being challenged. A challenge is when someone says to you, I have concerns about this book being on the library shelves. A ban is when the book is actually removed from circulation. So there is a difference. I've dealt with challenges. I serve children, right, middle school, and I've had parents come in and say, I don't think this should be here. I have a lot of concerns about this book. Most of the time, we can solve it with a conversation because right away, we're already on the same team because we both care about your kid. Right? Like we're both trying to make sure your kid has access to an excellent education. And if a parent decides that they don't want their kid to read a book, that is their right. parent can decide for their child, of course, all day long. Where we have to draw the line is that you do not get to decide for other people's children.
That's right.
And we are professionals when it comes to selecting books to serve our populations. That's what we are paid to do. That's what we have degrees in. There's a reason that we pick the books we pick. If I had an unlimited budget, of course I want to buy every book on the planet, but I don't have a lot of money because I work in a public school. So that's something that we also have to see as a barrier of like, what will our kids actually read? But I feel strongly that no book should be banned, and people, it's your First Amendment right, is freedom of speech that applies to text, and I think it's a really thin line if you say this one should be banned, well then what else? And I think it's a snowball, and it's a dangerous precedent to set. And no, I don't think there are books that kids should not be allowed to read. I think kids, and again, working with their parents, right? We are a team helping your kid through school. And if a parent is like, I really don't want my kid to have access to this, that is their decision, and that's fine, and we will support you. And I think that's where people see a disconnect, is that they assume that we're there to be like, no, they're gonna read what we want them to read. It's not, I just want them to read. It's not about what I want them to read. I want them to read, period. So that's my 2 cents.
Just a quick.
Sure.
2 or 3 titles that parents have come to you.
Tyrell by Co Booth, Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling. I've had some concerns about Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie. I've also had parents be concerned about like The Hunger Games or Legend by Marie Lu. Typically, it's when kids or like a kid is reading a book and the parent will like pick it up and read the back or like start reading the first couple chapters. And I've had a dad call, he was like, this is so inappropriate. And I was like, well, did you finish the whole book? Because we also teach our students, we don't judge books based on one section or a couple of 4-letter words. We judge books on, it's an entire work of art. You have to read the entire thing before you can object. So that's kind of how we've changed our procedures too, that like if people have a challenge, I am happy to have that conversation with anyone if you have a challenge or concern, but you need to also hold up your end of the deal, and you need to read the book in its entirety in order for us to be able to have an actual conversation about it. You're welcome. Did you have a question?
When you talk about banned books, you still have to consider guidelines, correct?
Yes, we have selection
Age-appropriate
policies, yep.
guidelines.
We do.
So, you're not, banning books is kind of extreme.
Yes.
You still have to consider guidelines for age.
Yes, we have selection procedures in place in our district, in every school district. And again, like if I had an infinite budget, how fun, like I could buy everything, but we don't. And so we also have to be really thoughtful about buying books that the kids will actually pick up and read, which is another component. And it's different between schools and public libraries also. But yes, we always have selection procedures and guidelines. We're not just buying based on personal interest. We can't have fully biased collections, right? We serve every kid in our school. And I wish every kid in my school came from like a happy, healthy home that had 2 supportive parents. But like, I have kids dealing with homelessness. I have kids who don't know where their next meal is coming from, kids who are living with grandparents or aunts and uncles, kids in foster care. I wish every kid was coming with no trauma, but that is not the case. And it's our responsibility to provide books that are both windows and mirrors for kids, which is something we talk about a lot. I feel like I'm talking only. Do you want to talk about windows and mirrors?
Yeah, windows and mirrors is a concept that was coined by Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop. That is something that we really uphold and live by. She believes that books should be windows that allow children to see a world beyond the one that they live in, mirrors that reflect their own identity, and sliding glass doors, which are essentially both. They reflect you and they allow you to step right into that space. And we have to honor and respect that some of our students do come from these wonderful, privileged, lovely, idyllic little lifestyles. And so their books there is nothing in that book that anybody would ever, raise an eyebrow at, because it's perfect and it's happy. And we have kids who are unhoused and who are experiencing violence and all kinds of horrifying things. And for us to say, this book's not appropriate because it deals with, sexual assault, okay, that kid lived it. And so you're telling them that not only is this book wrong, but their life is wrong. And that's really isolating and terrifying. And that's not for us to decide. We want to have everybody feel like they are honored and they can show up as their whole self, including the not so wonderful parts of their life, that they're not alone in that, because it feels very alone and terrifying.
And to go back to your question about guidelines, a law was passed this summer. It was Senate Bill 220. It is now Act 150 that requires all schools, all school libraries, public libraries, and academic libraries to have a material selection policy and a reconsideration procedure. And that's going into effect, I believe, July 1st, 2025. So those are guidelines that will help all of us when we are reviewing and choosing books for our own personal collections.
You don't get pushback from parents on any of the guidelines, surely?
All of our information is public facing on our website. So we encourage parents to read them. We encourage parents to have conversations with their kids about what they're reading. It's a great way to stay connected if you do have students in school to read what they're reading. It's available. We've never had someone, I mean, that could change. I could go home to an email that says, I hate everything about you. But no, I've never had someone push back. I mean, we've had people express concerns before, but we are professionals in our field, and we are empathetic people as educators too, and we want to have those conversations, and typically that's what it is a conversation, because most people are just seeking clarity. And again, like, if you have concerns about your child, like, we honor a parent's wishes. It's not a place for an educator to step between a kid and their family. Like, the parents get the final say for your kid, not for all kids.
And these aren't just policies and things that we're just like deciding willy-nilly, and it's like it is uppercase P policy that is dictated by our school board, and it is lowercase p procedures that we as a group of librarians have created, that has been approved by our superintendent and our building admin, and it's something that is, we revisit it regularly, and it's something that is upheld, and not just fast and loose today how it feels at my school, but it's different over there. Like, it's it's real policy that is dictated by people other than ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And there's nothing secretive about it. No one's like working in the shadows to create policies to undermine people. Like, no, it's available on our website. It's like, you are free to read and contact us. Like, our contact information, our catalogs are public facing. So we encourage those conversations if people have concerns.
I think Vermont is really lucky.
Yeah, we are,
I mean, truly.
yeah.
I mean, one of the questions I had was not necessarily about book banning. First, understand, I do not think books should be banned. Yeah, I think everything should be out there. But we've got some interesting stuff that's come up, that's stuff that has been pulled from shelves, like Tintin in the Congo.
You're kidding.
Tintin in the Congo has been taken off shelves all over the place. I've got a copy of it in French. I don't have.
Socks.
And it's got very racist images of Africans in this particular Tintin book. Remember the Dr. Seuss books? 6 of those were pulled a few years ago. And one of them, which actually broke my heart, was, and to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street.
But also, sorry to interrupt you, removed by his estate and his family members, not
Right.
by other people. Like, they made the decision.
To stop publication of
They
those
did,
books.
and they made the decision based on certain social pressures they felt. And the problem with this book, which I always thought was a great book to teach kids how to write, because it's sort of, look at ordinary events and use your imagination and see how it builds. But he's got what is a stereotypic picture of a Chinese gentleman eating with chopsticks. And that people, the Seuss estate found very bothersome.
It's interesting that you say that, Becky. One of the things when I write about or talk about this explosion of pornography is that when I was young, growing up in Morrisville, the neighborhood kids would go up into our attic because we were subscribers to National Geographic, and we'd be up there freezing our ass off, going through hundreds of dusty copies looking for a little African lady, who with exposed breasts. And that was our idea of the most amazing thing in the world. National Geographic has now apologized formally, internationally, for how they have portrayed indigenous people regardless of that, but just, you know, how they've expressed them and sort of the way they've. I have one other question for the group here. I'm really impressed. Pardon?
Did you finish what you were saying?
I think so, go
Yeah.
on.
Oh, the only other thing is, growing up in Morrisville, there were no black people and there were no Jews. And I remember being asked, when did you first see a black person? And my innocent response was Little Black Sambo. Do you remember that book?
Yes.
And that was the honest truth. That was the first time I saw a black person. But again, my question to the group is, I have been doing a lot of research on, including taking a course in adverse childhood experiences, trauma-informed counseling, and epigenetics. And I would love to know your thoughts about how the panoply of rich books that you all have in your institutions can play a positive role in trauma-informed counseling. I mean, you know, the people who want books banned don't want their children, you know, they don't like the idea of trauma-informed counseling. They want it all left the way it is. And yet it seems to me that great literature and art is an amazing recovery opportunity for trauma, you know, for childhood trauma. I'd love your thoughts.
Sure. Well, I don't know if you remember growing up, but growing up is like the straight up worst. It's terrible. Being a teenager is agony. Books help kids feel connected.
Yeah.
Books make kids not feel alone. And we always get students with diverse backgrounds, including kids who have been through significant types of trauma.
Yeah.
And sometimes a conversation with me might not make them feel connected, but they might find a book that makes them say like, oh, it's not just me. I'm not alone.
Yeah.
And like Beth said before, like if we take those books, like that's a really hard topic, that's an uncomfortable topic, so you can't read it, you're telling them like, well, what happened to you is so uncomfortable that people don't want to hear about
Exactly.
it. And kids are also fragile and they are resilient too, but like the more we can do to make kids feel seen and heard, the healthier they will be as they grow up.
And sorry.
Go for it.
I also think it opens up a window to their peers. I know like kids who haven't experienced that trauma, and to read it through a book and then be able to understand what their peers are going through, and opens up a window for parents to have those conversations at their homes with their children who haven't had those situations, to be more informed moving forward. I know that's how we treat books like that at my house. My kids read whatever they want, and then we have a conversation about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think we really have a responsibility to see how our students, our patrons are represented within our collection. You said growing up in Morrisville you hadn't seen any other people of color outside of Little Black Sambo, and unfortunately the diversity and the racial background of Vermont hasn't changed a whole lot since then. And so in my town of Westford, we are like 98% white, and so I have a couple of children of color, and it is not okay for those handful of children. The only way that they are represented is as a stereotypical depiction with chopsticks.
Exactly.
It's unacceptable.
Yeah.
And so, you know, if Dr. Seuss's family was like, we want his legacy to be green eggs and ham and cat and hat and not this illustration, then more power to them. We didn't have those books. We had a conversation among ourselves. I think the only one that was left, most of the books were so, like, they just weren't around anymore. And like,
No, some of them were not.
Yeah, they
you know,
were
so it was
McGilligut's Pool, I
Yeah.
think, yeah.
yeah, and some of them that's a small picture book. Some of them were like long books that children were not taking home, and so they had long since been weeded for many other reasons. But we need to honor kids. They can't be represented as Little Black Sambo and nothing else.
Right.
They can't be only deficit characters. We
Right.
need to have children of color who are not homeless and with incarcerated parents and drug dealers. That's not how that is continuing to represent, you know, inappropriate stereotypes and negative depictions of people when they are so complex and so much more than the negative ways that they can be portrayed. So not only do those books need to be there, and we can evaluate that. We have software that allows us to look at the actual like racial breakdown of the authors and the characters within our books. That's great. We can see that I have 3,000 books that feature African Americans. Now I need to look at them and go, and how many of those are now really outdated and need to go because they're, portraying people in only one way? Or, okay, cool, I have a whole bunch of professional athletes. That's not representative of an entire culture. Like there needs to be, we need to do so much better, and it's an ongoing thing. We never are going to strike a balance where we'll say, I did it, guys, my collection is racially balanced, I did it, and pat yourself on the back, because it's a constant effort in motion, it's a constantly moving target, we're never done, the work is never done, and that's something that is terrifying and like so exciting and something to be celebrated because it's honorable and exciting work that we get to do.
What do you think about the publishers that are changing established books to remove some of the offensive language, like Huckleberry Finn? That they want to change just some of the references in there. What do you think? I mean, I'm not for that, but what do you guys think?
Yeah. Do you want to take it?
I mean, I could talk about everything. I feel like I'm talking so much. It's a classic Caitlin problem is that I love to talk. Yes, I think it's a complicated situation, but books are also indicative of the time and place and context in which they were written. When we are using those books, we do have conversations about like the historical setting in which they were written, but also there are so many gorgeous books being published. Life has changed. Even from when I was a kid reading middle school books, middle grade fiction like wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
And now our kids have like this vast opportunity of all these amazing books that are being published. I don't think a lot of kids are reading Huck Finn.
Right.
And ultimately like classics, like we talk about Great Gatsby, and they're not being read because they were published, almost 100 years ago, and for a lot of kids, like it's just not relevant to their life now.
I feel like this character doesn't have a phone. Who is this? What's
Yeah,
going on?
yeah, the lack of phones in a lot of books. You're like, wait, why wouldn't they just text them? It wasn't a thing.
Oh yeah, that's destroyed Sherlock Holmes.
So yeah, I mean, it's complicated, but typically, publishing house, the person who owns the rights to the book is the ultimate decider of how that book gets published. So it can or cannot change how they choose to move forward with that. But
Right.
that's a publishing house
Well-
decision. Unless the authors maintain rights to their books.
Yeah, well, that's the key. And that does happen in many cases where the publishing house cannot alter the text without, I know in general, the publishers own the absolute rights. But the whole, and I won't get into it, but the whole system of intellectual property law as it relates to copyright is in a shambles, frankly, and probably a good thing in many ways, because and I don't want to digress, but when you look at the network of major authors nowadays, the great publishers are gone. The Farrar, Straus and Giroux, the Knupfs, they're all gone. What you have now is a conglomerate of 4 publishers owned by one company. And, James Patterson made $65 million in 2022 and has 200 people working for him. The whole area of literary fiction is disappearing. There's no market. The genre markets are being exploited, but the publishers who wanted to find people who told great stories, it's not there. As this friend of mine who's head of marketing, he's actually head of Simon & Schuster now, said to me, I said, so are you doing anything with literary fiction? And he jokingly said, literary fiction, what's that again? And he said, oh, by the way, do you have a Trump book in you? I mean, he said that to me, and he was kidding. But if it's become an industry without a mission, that's scary.
Yes, I think that might be the case more for adult literary fiction. I feel like for
Yeah.
kids publishing,
I think
it's
that's true.
definitely
I
seen a
think you're
different
right.
type of growth.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and I feel like it's become much more vibrant and inclusive.
Yeah,
And I think there is a difference between like the two, because it
agree.
is in there, ultimately publishing is a business, right?
Yeah.
People are looking to make money.
Yeah.
But we as librarians can use our purchasing power, the limited public funding that we have.
That's true.
And again, we really can't speak to the adult world of it because we are so focused on early middle grade and young adult stuff, which is also like wonderful books. But we can celebrate authors like Rick Riordan, who are incredibly, prolific and really successful, and could just step away and retire on his like vast money that he's made from his books. And instead, he's created an imprint within his own publishing house, Hyperion, where he highlights and lifts up authors that otherwise would have a really hard time breaking into this industry, Indigenous authors and people of color that wouldn't be able to walk through the door in these publishing houses, wouldn't, the debut novel, they're not gonna be, they don't have the same clout that he has. And so he's like, here you go, I'm gonna put Rick Riordan Presents, and it's gonna be this Indigenous story that otherwise would have a really hard time getting published. And then we as librarians were like, Rick Riordan endorsed it? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it goes right on our shelves.
That's Catherine Patterson is a very good friend of Kate's and mine, and we talk with her even now. And Catherine's what, 96 or something?
Not yet.
But we still stay in close touch, and she's been such a champion of this edgy, and she articulates it so beautifully. She said, children are not who we think they are who they think they are. And I mean, how could you say it any better? And again, I remember asking her, why aren't you with a major publisher? And she said, because I want to be with a publisher who understands who I am and who my audience is. I think she's with Candlewick. But I mean, what an articulate,
That's a question. Two questions actually. Elizabeth, you mentioned a software that you guys can use. Could you talk a little bit more about this software?
Yeah, we use Destiny Library Manager through Follett, and they have a feature through TitleWise. It's this collection analysis tool, and because they already have access to our entire collection, as does anybody who has a computer, they have all the MARC records for every title that we have, both digital and in print, and they're able to go through and can give us this great little breakdown of, we can go by topic, we can go by age. Oh my gosh, it's kind of scary to look and be like, oh no, the average age of my collection is like 2000. We can see the breakdown of nonfiction to fiction. It's a really wonderful tool. What it doesn't have is just that nuance of, okay, cool, I have 3,300 books that feature African Americans. Now I need to go and find those and look through and make sure that it isn't, just negative stereotypes. It doesn't have, you can read a description, but we're not able to really get a sense for the full depiction of the book based on that analysis.
Yeah, it's a tool, it's not. It's
Yeah,
a tool wielded by someone who knows how to wield it.
So is this for all age groups, or is this targeted at kids' books? Because I was wondering about adult books. There's a very passionate, we need diverse books community that's looking into diversity in children's books. But what about adult collections? Anybody know anything about that?
It's really interesting. That's an interesting question. I'm not sure if you have to be a Follett customer to use this tool, or if you can just upload your collection and have them run the analysis.
There are definitely ones that you can use without, that you can use to touch the diversity of your collection. We've done it here.
Yeah, I found a thing called List of Lists from Syracuse, University of Syracuse, that lists diverse books in a whole bunch of different fields for adults. But I didn't find that much out there that looks at adult collections, which are certainly just as important.
And then we also just need to be careful within that umbrella of like diverse, because it really does create like a norm and an other. And so it is a wonderful thing to amplify and to, celebrate LGBTQ authors, but labeling those as like, well, those are diverse books, like that is upholding that, a heterosexual relationship is the norm and this is unusual. Like we need to, it's again that work that's constantly going, and it's great that we are recognizing and amplifying, and now the work becomes just integrating, and we don't have a pride section. We don't, and we will never put rainbow stickers on books that feature queer characters, because that is harmful in many ways. But again, it does get back to that like there's a norm and then there's an other, and that's something that we are never going to do.
Thank you, I think that's a really important thing to say, because if we wanna become equal and equitable, you know, it's not diverse, you're not different,
Right.
we're all the same, we just have different things about us.
Yeah.
My other question, Mr., I'm sorry, I
Oh,
can't see his
just
name.
Bill.
Bill, Mr. Bill. You mentioned like James Patterson now having 200 people working for him. When you say that, and me having very little knowledge of how the industry works, it brings to mind to me thinking that he doesn't write his own books anymore. Other people write it for him in his writing style.
It's a mix.
Mix.
It's a mix. I mean, if you apply absolute, to an author and their book, Patterson doesn't fit. He's got people that are resident editors, development editors, copy editors, and people rewriting sections of his books, and people coming up with ideas. It's a factory. I mean, if you Google Patterson, and again, you make $65 million, are you a business or are you an author? I'm not saying that Patterson's, his books aren't good, but they sort of, they represent the frontier of art becoming business. And that's just scary to me. 20 years ago, I was chair of the Vermont Library Board. And I have to tell you, the discussion we're having today, we never had that in the 2 years that I was chair. And I talked to Reeve Lindbergh, she succeeded me, and people were not running around screaming and yelling about banning books. I mean, I think we have, for the most part, a tradition in Vermont of being open to the idea. I remember one other quick thing, when I was chair of the Vermont Council of Fine Arts, we were doing the whole thing that any organization was doing around diversity, inclusion, and equity. And I was interviewing people to come lead our board and our faculty to have this discussion. And I hired ultimately this fabulous woman who's currently at Vermont Law School, Dr. Shirley Jefferson. And she came in, and we're about 25 of us are sitting in a room like this, and she goes and she says, okay, I want each person in 2 minutes to tell me the thing in their life they're most ashamed of. And people are like, and it goes around and people are sort of staring at their shoes, but they did say things. And then she said, okay, now, can we dismiss this nonsense about diversity? We're all diverse. Every person in this room is different. I want to talk about inclusion. And she had that group so focused on all the right aspects of this. I was blown away, and afterwards I went over and I gave her a big hug, and I said, that was just absolutely fabulous. And I said, why did you ask the question about everybody telling what the most embarrassing thing they'd ever done in their life was? And she said, before we could have this discussion honestly, I needed people to feel vulnerable. But the thing that stuck with me is, let's not waste time talking about diversity. We understand everyone in this room is different. What we need to be talking about is inclusion. Anyway, sorry.
No, it's a great story, but some people struggle with the inclusion part. Some people struggle with that.
Oh, no, I
piece of
agree
the
with you.
puzzle.
I agree with you.
Sorry, I feel like you've raised your hand like several times, and I feel like did you have your hand up too?
Well, just because I'm awake, I guess I got my hand.
Okay, but I've seen you raise your hands a couple times.
You mentioned digital versus hard copy. How are kids reading now? Has it changed? Is it skewed towards digital? Does it make it harder, easier?
It makes it easier, especially if you have a kid who struggles with the act of reading. So if a kid can listen to a story, because absorbing stories in all formats is encouraged, right? And some kids really struggle with the act of reading. In my school, we are paper book fans. We love like a physical copy, but we all subscribe to Sora, which is through Overdrive. So our entire district shares a resource where you can either have an ebook, or you can have an audiobook from Sora. The kids have access, it's part of our lessons, they all know how to log in, they can go put them on their phones. It's also great because if you have a kid who does have like severe dyslexia, you can have an ebook and change the font to an easier read font for kids with dyslexia, so they have better access, because ultimately like we could have the best books in the world on the shelf, but if kids can't read them, they're not helpful.
That's right.
So yeah, there's been a shift, but I'd say we're still like, at least in the schools, we are still very, very heavily printed material. And teachers like to know that they have like here's my independent reading book, especially in middle school. They need a lot of proof because they can be a little wily. So they need to carry their books with them. But they have access on their Chromebooks anytime.
That changes when you get older. My age, I go out and spend $35 for a hardcover. I read before I go to sleep. I'm lying there like this, I fall asleep. The hardcover hurts. It hurts.
I had a question about, are there guidelines for how books are, what would you call it, cataloged in libraries? For example, one of my bugbears is teaching creationism as science. And in my opinion, of course, we should have books on this, but it should be cataloged under religion, not under science. So there must be a lot of examples like that, where you make a call on where to put the book in the library. Yeah. And that's almost a form of, self-censorship. You're making decisions along those lines. How do you approach that? Are there guidelines for this? How does this work?
Well, I think in the case, it might be different for public libraries, but for school libraries, our collections support our curriculum first, and then the personal interests of our students. So when it comes, we don't have books on creationism in my school because it's not part of our curriculum, and there hasn't been no one said to me like, I have a personal interest in this. Because we also let kids, like if they have a suggestion or something they're looking for, we try to get the books that we can get if they will read them. But it might be, and in our collections, I move things where kids will find them.
Absolutely.
Like how kids like naturally browse a bookstore. Like we want to make it enticing, and I want them to go not just based on the cover of the book, even though we all look at the cover of the book, but I want them to be able to find things independently, and all they need to really know is that how they use the catalog, like finding a location there, finding it on the map, getting it off the shelf, that system is the same in most libraries. But you might need to answer that for public libraries.
We stick very closely to the Dewey Decimal System, so we put it where the Dewey Decimal System tells us to put it. We have books on creationism, and they're in the religion section, and that's where the Dewey Decimal System tells us to put them. We've different than a lot of children's libraries, have our fiction section genrefied as well, instead of by author, and so there are resources online as well that help you sort where things should be, and we don't just pick where something's going to go. We research where it should be, where people are going to find it, where people are going to be looking for it.
I've heard a number of librarians talking about the genre cataloging in children's libraries, and I've always wondered how that works. If you've got an adventure book with animals that are dealing with fairies, do you put it in fantasy, or is it in animals, or is it in mountain climbing?
You get 2 copies, you put it in both places, and you see where it circulates. And you let your patrons decide.
I like that.
I like that too.
But I will say they do circulate, I think, better when they're genrefied. My children's chapter books are genrefied, and they circulate. If I have a student who loves adventure or mystery, they just go to the adventure or mystery section rather than having to go through all of the authors of the entire fiction section. I have not conquered nonfiction genreification, though. That is a little overwhelming to me right now.
And we're opposites, because I ditched Dewey.
Yes.
Dewey for, because Dewey also has a lot of things like, this goes under religion and this goes under other. So some things are kept in it's separated,
Right.
So it's also an older
These
system.
Western religions are religion, and these are
religions.
mythology.
Yeah, this is mythology. And so we ditched Dewey and made nonfiction, because kids typically don't go to informational text by choice, even though there's so much good nonfiction out there. So we changed it so it was easier if the kids wants to read about astronomy. now science, all astronomy is together. Like it's been much easier for them to navigate. But I also struggle with genrefying fiction because books can be more than one thing. But like Beth said, your kids will, where you put it, like where will they gravitate towards it? Because the goal is that they will pick it up and read it.
I like that you ended with that the goal is that people pick it up and read it.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, why are the LGBTQ ones not kept in your libraries, but if a kid shows interest, then you will get it for them, the way a book on creation or religion would be. I'm just curious, where's the inclusion in that? If you would keep these books on your shelves available for kids to grab at their leisure, just as they look throughout, why would not books in relation to creation or relation to Jesus Christ, why would those not be kept at the kids' eye level available for them to browse and look at?
We have books
Where's the
like
inclusion in that?
yeah, we have like books that deal with religion, and we have them in both nonfiction and in fiction, and kids are encouraged to browse everything. And we've had families say like, hey, we love this series by this author. Like if we're able to buy them, again, it's all based on funding. We don't have enough money to buy everything we really want to buy. They are available. And I think sometimes people feel excluded if there's like a highlight on like queer books. But those have been like historically marginalized stories. So I feel like some people are like, wow, that's everywhere right now. I think it's just a moment in time where like, oh, those people are included in the publishing party of the world.
No, I like what she said about not sticking a ring.
And we would never put like a cross on a book either and have a kid feel,
Let it be normal, let's not highlight it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I guess I feel like when it comes to Christianity and religion in general, it's not the case. It's, well, that stuff we're going to keep separate and we're going to put this label on it. Or we're not going to ever stick it on a display that someone could browse and grab.
Yeah.
Because they're interested.
In my library, we have books about world religions. We do not have any religious texts. I don't have a Bible. I don't have a Quran.
So that's what I'm saying, because there are plenty of religious fiction stories. I mean, my kids read them all day long, and yet those are not in the library. I've never, I just ordered a couple online the other day because I could never come sign them out here the way I could.
The stories about, or the actual like religious texts themselves?
No, the stories.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, like, where's the inclusion if we're gonna go out of our way to have these books? And I agree that I really do agree with her that we shouldn't be banning books, and that, because I don't think we're free. If we start banning stuff and there's no freedom.
Right. Where does it end?
Absolutely.
I just think it's a dangerous and slippery slope.
Yeah.
But I just also do not see beyond.
And I would really encourage you to speak to whether it's the school or the public library, to go to that librarian and just say, because that happens all the time, my kid's really into whatever, and could you help us find some, either like get them or recommend them to me.
And that's always the response, is that we can order that, and we can have that, that's like,
but sometimes
that's not you going out of your way to include the way you go out of your way to include things.
And sometimes it's a blind, everybody with a brain has a bias, and we all have our blind spots, and sometimes they need to be, like brought to our awareness. If it was up to me, my library would have 0 spider books and many more Taylor Swift biographies. And so sometimes people have had to say like, my kid's really into dirt bikes and you don't have any. I'm like, oh my gosh, you were, but that's never been on my radar, and it needs to be. And so, and some of those, like, there is more of an effort because these books have been marginalized to, like, I can flip through School Library Journal and there will be 3-starred reviews of books that should be added with queer characters, and I'm gonna have to look to find reviews on religious stories because those haven't been uplifted in the same way, because they haven't been diminished in the same way. And so it can be harder to find. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't be found. It doesn't mean they shouldn't be displayed and be accessible. It just requires a little bit more effort. And I do encourage you to bring it to the attention, because we want collections that represent everybody. And it might be a limitation within my budget. Ours was cut. But let me interlibrary loan it for you. Somebody will have it if I can't get it. Sometimes they're not in publication anymore. People have recommended books for me to get. I'm like, that's great. It's not being printed anymore. I can wait to get a used copy, I guess. Sometimes it's just limitations. That doesn't indicate malice. But
Oh, there's some wonderful stuff that's out of print that always makes me insane.
Is there ever a worry on that aspect of separation of church and state then? Because education and, you're supposed to keep it separate what the law says, etc. But is that ever a possibility as to why there isn't more religious text already existing in the catalog?
I think that's the difference between having a story about Noah's Ark, like a picture book, and having the actual Bible. There is a story and then there is a religious text. And I like, for me, that's where I see the separation of like, we can have, different stories versus an actual, I can't have a Quran for an elementary school because there are no illustrations. It wouldn't be accessible to children. It's that level of,
And it's also, as school libraries and public libraries, you should have representation from many different world religions, not just your own religion.
Yeah.
So that's important too, to make sure many people are represented.
I think that's a really critical question you asked, and I before coming thought a lot about it, and Kate and I talked about it, is there is a clear effort in this country to grind down that separation between church and state. I mean, we often talk about racism or, but when you look at, and one of the things I've written about in the past is when you have a sitting president that is advocating for a ban on all Muslims entering America, I mean, what does that say about where we're going, or where, it's terrifying. And the Establishment Clause is one of the most important clauses, in our Constitution, and one of the most revered, like freedom of speech, and again, this is not so much about libraries, but I think what has an impact on libraries is what is happening nationally. And it's important to really understand these trends. The Great Replacement theory, how does that affect book bans? I'm sorry to digress, but I think the discussion that we're having today needs to also be understood in the context of the discussion we're having nationally. And how can our libraries be a front line against this divisive, sort of breakdown? I think it's just so important.
Well, I've been thinking about your comment about feeling like, it makes me think like it's hard to feel excluded, right? Like it's hard to feel left out. Like, yeah, so these books are on display, but the books I'm interested in are not on display. And I think that just highlights like over time, and what we say with our collections, we're constantly evaluating them and trying to expand them, trying to make sure everyone is included in the picture. That comes from communication too. Like, so we're making sure like our school had like more books about like kids who followed Christian faiths, not so much about kids who were Buddhist or Muslim, who were the kids that were newer to my school. So that's where I've been focusing more of my budget money to make sure everyone is represented. But if you ever feel like that, I highly recommend that you talk to your school's librarian and talk to your public librarians, because all library material is paid for with taxpayer money. That means all of that material should have some appeal to the taxpayers in that district. And it just made me think, like, I think about kids who come and they're like figuring out that they're part of the LGBTQ community, or they are having like a faith crisis. Like some families, some kids as they're growing up in 8th grade are like, I don't think I want to do this anymore, like to live this life anymore. They're figuring things out. And that sometimes shows me these gaps in my collection where I'm like, oh, like what do I need to provide for you to have a story that you can relate to as you figure this out for yourself. But it's constant, it's always evolving. So I highly recommend.
And that's good, because just listening to you just makes me realize that there's a lot you have to think about. There's a lot.
And every year is different, like depending on the kids we get. Some years I'm like physical differences.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Some years you're gonna get kids with mobility devices. Some years you're gonna have kids who have limb differences and deformities. And like, how do I have a book that shows you it's not just like, oh, poor you, poor baby. Like, how do we make sure that you feel like you are included as a main character too? It's hard though, and it's always evolving.
I wanted to see what you guys feel about the move to boycott certain authors. For example, the one that springs to my mind is J.K. Rowling, who, certainly the Harry Potter books have been challenged based on witchcraft. But they've also been very much challenged based on the author herself and her take on transgender issues.
I think this is such a fascinating area, and Kate and I talked a lot about this before we came up, is there's trigger statements that trigger immense events that are unreal. If you look very carefully at what J.K. Rowling said, all she really was trying to say, and we both did a lot of research on this, is that cisgendered females need to also be recognized as well as transgender. And it's not necessarily intrinsically a transphobic statement. And she went overboard to explain where she was coming from, I think in a way that was very convincing. The issue of what's in the Harry Potter books, as you said, is a different issue. But banning her because she's viewed as transphobic, I think is a horrendous mistake. I think the same is true, and Kate did the research on this, the Dorothy Canfield Fisher, the misinformation around that. She was not an outspoken eugenicist. She was championed by Eleanor Roosevelt as being a great champion of women's rights and indigenous people's rights. She served on a committee that came under Perkins that had to do with looking at the 100-year-old tradition of Vermont country people. And by virtue of her, and please jump in, Kate, if I don't have this exactly right, by virtue of her serving on that committee, which came under Perkins, Judy Dow said she's a eugenicist, and other people said, the Peace and Justice Center said, we have to take her name off books. And it just, when you really look, you know, we lose our curiosity sometimes, but when you really look under an issue like the J.K. Rowling thing or the Dorothy Canfield Fisher thing, you don't ban their books. You don't do that. I mean, in her case, I know it's not a book ban, but taking her name off the award.
I thought it was a travesty.
Pardon?
I thought it was a travesty.
Horrendous.
I
Horrendous.
disagree.
But, you know, the argument that I heard from librarians about the Dorothy Canfield Fisher Award, all of this came down while I was on the Dorothy Canfield Fisher Committee, which is now the Golden Dome Committee. A lot of the librarians said the problem is that school kids.
Well, that's
DCF was confusing, and
it's a trigger for kids. The
It is a
Department of
trigger.
Children and
Children
Families,
and Families.
foster care, like
And
that
it-
can be really hard for them. And
and
that was
this-
all the logos everywhere.
yeah, it was.
I have firsthand seen kids put books back because
Yeah.
they had the DCF sticker on. They're like, DCF, nope, not for me. They don't even look at anything else about the book.
Well, GD isn't great either.
Yeah, and that's a conversation like at the adult level, right? Like if we take someone's name off of an award, but for the kids, like in the library, all of that, and I think it was just it was an innocent mistake, but like all of the advertising was the DCF award, DCF, and so kids get, especially kids who are dealing with, maybe part of DCF right now that can be really, really scary and triggering for them. And so as school librarians, we were just like, could we just name it something like the Maple Leaf Award, like something very like
Maybe, I like
basic and
Maple
simple.
Leaf. I wasn't fond of Golden Dome.
Well, in the middle school also had Golden Dome, and I was like, that's terrible.
But the other thing
Yeah, I know.
Terrible.
people's lives are different from their artwork.
Yeah, we teach our kids that too,
I
that
mean,
art
there-
and
there
artists
are-
are separate.
Pardon the language, but there are assholes who create great works of art,
Absolutely.
you know, and there are amazingly talented people who don't create great works of art. And I think we need to see them differently.
Well, we teach our kids all the time, like art and artist are different, right?
Yeah.
And you can appreciate an art, like a piece of art, like a book or
Yeah.
a painting, whatever. And then it is your choice. So if you get like really become like some kids get super into one particular author and like they want to read everything by that author, so they start to Google the author. Then they'll be like, oh, oh, I don't know if I like the person who created it. But it doesn't mean that you didn't love the story that got
Right.
created.
Right.
And again, that comes down to personal choice, right? And like their choice and First Amendment right to pick what they want to read. And then as they grow up, typically, because my kids are like becoming more aware, because I work with middle school, they are not fully aware yet. They're becoming humans. They're not quite there yet, but they are starting to figure that stuff out on their own. And again, that's like personal preference.
And I think that's what comes down to your question about should some authors be boycotted. It is up to you whether you want to purchase those books.
That's right.
So we might not be in agreement about J.K. Rowling or about Dorothy Canfield Fisher, but that's okay. I don't have to buy
Yes.
those books. You can buy those books, and that's how it should be.
Exactly.
And the truth is, when it comes to Dorothy Canfield Fisher, much though I do admire her, I don't think anybody reads Understood Betsy anymore.
Didn't understand, I didn't hear you, Becky.
No, I don't think anybody reads Understood Betsy anymore. Remember her book?
No,
Well, I did read
I read
one of the objections was that, or one of the acceptances of getting rid of that name attached was the fact that books aren't popular.
Yes, and
Anymore, and it's like me and Anna Green Gables, which you tell me, does anybody reading Anna Green Gables?
Yes.
Or-
yes.
And with a me.
The
Yes.
graphic novel, yeah, but
Yeah.
not.
Maybe she's making a comeback.
Yeah.
That would be wonderful.
I know we're about out of time here, but have you seen the ALA's collection of banned books for kids?
yeah,
This is a book club in the making.
yeah.
This is terrific. I
It's
hope
so
we-
good.
I hope we could do this.
American
The
Library Association. You're welcome.
Yeah.
Breaking down those abbreviation areas.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, acronyms, bad.
Yeah. And educate, we do a lot of acronyms, so you do have to
So
catch.
many.
Yes. Please let us know.
Of course, I have to say the Dorothy Canfield Fisher Book Award had DCF first. So I think we had dibs.
I wish it had stayed that way. If we don't have much time left, does anyone have questions
Yeah.
for us?
Getting back to the Amazon situation, that they banned a book, does it say, if you
They
try to
didn't.
search it, does it say it's banned or not available, or does it just not acknowledge its existence?
What they did was they ceased to offer it in their collection. So that would not be the equivalent of a ban, but they were clearly very uncomfortable with a book that had been touted as, and basically was, a terrorist manual at that point in time.
But they might still sell like the Anarchist Cookbook, which is another one, right? Like it depends, but Amazon's in its own corporate entity and they get to decide what they carry or not.
Well, the classic example is the ACLU's defense in 1978 of the Nazi march in Skokie, Illinois. The Nazis, the American Nazi Party was scheduled to march in Skokie, Illinois, and the police department, everybody was up in arms and they shut it down, and the ACLU came in and said, it's free speech. You let them absolutely march and express what it is they have to say. And the ACLU lost 4/5 of its donors when they did that. 4/5, which is huge. But they stood by the principle that these people have the right to express their odious opinions. It's sort of the classic. If you're curious, just Google ACLU and Nazi march in Illinois.
Well, it's a bit like Trump, saying there were good people on both sides in that demonstration down in North Carolina.
Charlottesville.
Yeah.
Charlottesville.
So you haven't mentioned AI. Does anyone keep up with what's going on there as far as, changing the?
Luckily, I'll be dead before it's too late. It's terrifying to me. And what's really terrifying to me is there's so much money in new technology, social media, smartphones, pornography, AI. There's so much money that even though we have the capacity to regulate it, we don't have the courage. we don't have the courage to say, you know what? Tell you what, guys, you can't bring your smartphones into class and watch movies while you're supposedly, learning American history. You can't do it. And
How it affects you all in libraries.
yeah,
I think AI was like a real fear thing when people first saw it. It was like, like, what are we gonna do with this? But actually, I think we've also been like, this is a new technology that we're currently dealing with. It's like when they say we're building the plane while we're flying it.
Yeah.
And AI can actually be a really, really powerful tool if you use it correctly. It can be great if you're like, I need 10 questions based on this book that deal with theme. Like you can ask AI, it can be a resource for you too.
it can.
And I think when we talk about, we work with students up to the age of 18. Well, actually for me 14, but in a public school setting, be up to the age of 18. You can tell what a kid has written and what AI has written pretty easily.
Oh, absolutely.
And I love when they're like, oh, I submitted my 6-page essay. And I was like, this is supposed to be 1 page, babe, what you doing? And they're like, it's like this beautifully written piece. I'm like, my computer wrote that. But it
that may
also,
change.
it may change, and it
That may
opens the
change.
door for conversations about being ethical users of information, right? And critical ethical users of information. And also, just because AI wrote it doesn't necessarily mean it's correct. So that's the other side, is like you can use it as a tool, but it cannot be, you can't just like print it out and be like, oh, I trust this completely. It's just another tool.
But the question is, do you have a regulation that says this was written by Fyodor Dostoevsky and this Dostoevsky book was written by AI?
That's beyond my pay
Yeah,
grade.
no, but I mean, that's one of the things that the regulators are facing, is do you label it as AI generated as opposed to human generated? And again, my concern is, when there's a ton of money involved, whether it's the pharmaceutical industry or AI or technology or smartphones or social media, we don't want to mess with it. And yet, the negative impact, the positive impacts are all there, but so are the negative.
Well, I think James Patterson is made for AI. And publishing companies could save $65 million.
But to be fair to James Patterson, donates a lot of money to
He
public and
is
school
a-
libraries.
To independent bookstores, too.
Independent bookstores,
Yeah.
I wrote a grant, I was given I got money for buying multiple copies for my kids to read, so to
And
be
the
fair,
term for
devil's
that-
advocate, he does.
The term for that is
Donate.
regulatory capture.
I don't know, I'm so grateful I had any supplement to my logo.
No, I know, I get it. I mean, if I was a billionaire and, I was concerned about people who are upset about me, I'd donate money to them.
And I will, sorry.
No,
I just wanted to go back to your question about
Yeah.
AI. For school librarians, school teachers, school ed tech people, there are so many professional development opportunities right now concerning AI. So if people want to learn about it, and just like we are building the plane as we're flying it, that is what is happening now. So there are opportunities out there, and it's just we are still learning as we're going along, and
Yeah,
I feel
that's
like
right.
that is
That's fair.
how it's going to be.
I agree.
That's interesting.
Anybody got any more questions? Thank you, all of you.
And thank you for coming out.
Thank
It was so
you.
much fun.
Great topic.
And if you have other questions, you can email us. All our information's on our school website.
Yes.
If you have any comments or concerns,
Definitely.
you can catch us via email.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Inviting us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Right, and Banned Books Week is coming up.
It sure
Celebrate your
is.
freedom to read.
Yes.
Woohoo.